Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this special episode of the Long COVID podcast. I can't exactly call it a best of because all of my guests have way more that is worth listening to than the short clips I've selected today. But this festive compilation could be seen a bit like a Christmas tapas. It's got a little bit of everything. Here, each of my guests have a few words of wisdom or something interesting to say. If you haven't already, I definitely recommend listening to the full episodes, as all of my guests have been brilliant. Episodes are available, as always, via the website at longcovidpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. In episode 1, my first guest, Barbara Melville from Long COVID Scotland, talks about what she would love to see in terms of care.
Well, this is where I get idealistic, very idealistic. What I want is for somebody with any symptoms of chronic illness to be able to go into their doctor and get diagnosis, evidence-based treatment and support, empathy. And for them to also have that extended to other areas of their life. So when they mention it to their mom or their aunt or their best friend or their boss, that they get the same support and empathy. Now, that is incredibly idealistic, and if we see that in my lifetime, that would be a miracle. But that is what we're moving towards. And I think, as you say, the care is the key part. If we can get lived experience at the heart of the services and so on that are being designed and delivered, that would be a great start. And for that to then translate into treatment and care, that would be brilliant. But I would like it to be wider and more cultural. I think as a culture, we've got issues with how we view the chronically ill, and that really, really needs to change. I would like to see everything change.
Next, Barbara talks about the Long COVID Summit that Long COVID Scotland held earlier this year.
I think it's just got to the point where there really isn't enough. This has become a crisis for Scotland. It's an emergency, and so it was put together quite quickly. And yeah, that's what it was about. It was about the fact that what's being put in place, while extremely well-meaning, we're sure of that, just isn't translating into, diagnosis and care for people. There are people who are, sort of sitting at home with chest pain and breathlessness, and they're going to the doctor and their doctor can't help, or the tests are coming back normal if they're getting them. And some people aren't getting anything at all. People getting repeated chest infections and so on too, people with neurological issues. And some of these are really, really severe and serious symptoms that people are experiencing, including, like I say, the chest problems. So symptoms of heart attack, symptoms of stroke. And people are sitting at home with this and they're not getting help. And the sign guideline, although we've, definitely got time for sign and we're happy to input into that, the implementation note that went along with it, that was worked on by Scottish Government, and we did input into that, it just doesn't seem to be, again, translating into anything. It's not helping people as far as we can tell. And we just thought we need to do something here. We need to get people in a room.
In the next episode, my partner and I talk about my journey. I think you suggested that there must be some sort of support group somewhere.
Yeah, I think I did.
I think you were sort of at a loss as to what to do.
Yeah, I didn't know what to do, and I thought there must be other people going through it. And I think initially I suggested it, and you said, I can't think of anything worse than this is really depressing, finding loads of other people who are really depressed as well.
Yeah.
But you went and found
I
more
did,
anyway.
yeah, I did go and look, and actually in some ways it was quite reassuring because there were so many other people that I hadn't realised. I'd felt really alone through all of the bit where I'd been feeling awful. You just sort of think normally if I was complaining of not being able to breathe and chest pains, you'd be into the hospital for a barrage of tests before you could blink. But, because there were so many other people that were worse off at the time, they were sort of like, we can't really deal with you, so you just have to deal with it yourself. So finding out that there were thousands of other people in the same situation was comforting, at least. I found as time went on and no improvement happened, it just got more and more frustrating, more and more depressing, because I didn't really know what to do. There wasn't a lot of advice from anywhere as to what I should be doing. Should I be trying to exercise? Should I be doing nothing? There was not really any advice from anywhere. And, as a person that exercises what I do, I just didn't really know what to do with myself, did I?
No.
Next, I talked to my friend Chiara, who, unknown to me, had been suffering from symptoms from around about the same time as myself. She talks about the pressure both from herself and from the world, and the difficulty with an unknown illness and not knowing what to do.
The hardest thing I found was myself not being critical, of accepting. I'm not, in fact, I do think I've learned a lot. I've learned to be more patient with myself, and just to accept the way that I am. Okay, this is how I feel. I mean, I'm not saying I do it every time, but when I look at the whole, the sort of length of time of me having it from the start till now, I mean, at the beginning, and I was so hard on myself. And actually, for every bout I'd have, when I was in bed, the first couple of days when you feel really bad and you're in bed, in some ways that wasn't the bad bit, because usually I'd just sleep through that, and that's okay. When you're asleep, you're asleep. It was the few days between feeling like that and feeling like well enough to do anything, where I was just sort of mooching around, feeling sort of non-specifically ill. And I found those days really, really difficult, because I'd just be going, come on, Chiara, get something done. And I couldn't, and I'd get so upset and so frustrated, and oh God, bloody hell, it was hard. To manage something, as you say, it is actually helpful to have a label, because then if you can, because then you know what you're dealing with, and you can find out all the information that there is about it. But without that, you're kind of in the dark, aren't you? And for that took me a long time to work out that when you feel well, you also can't do stuff, because then you get ill. And that's really frustrating, because you think, well, actually I feel all right and I want to. So I find that one quite difficult. And also if you then do set it off, not to give yourself a hard time about that, blah, 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 blah.
In episode 4, I talked to Jane and Chris from Long COVID Scotland about research involvement. They've been inputting into long COVID research, and here Jane explains exactly what they do.
Quite often what we do in the early stages, we advise on a range of things: language in the research application, its ability to interact with the participant. Bearing in mind that people with long COVID, their span of attention, their ability to focus in on words, written, listening, TV, they tend to be limited. You've only so much energy. So any study really has got to take that into account. So we advise on things like that. We also advise, and we test out apps that the study might have, and we test out questionnaires as well amongst our members, and we give feedback to the researchers, because there's no good having a questionnaire around helping long COVID people if they can't answer the questionnaire because it's too long. It's too complicated. Even colours, different words, they just don't fit sometimes. So we give our feedback around that sort of thing to researchers.
Chris talks about what the benefits might be of getting involved in research yourself. Whether you are in Scotland, elsewhere in the UK, or the rest of the world, please do get involved in research into long COVID. And there are some links in the show notes of episode 4 that can direct you to some of the places that you can get involved.
The benefits, kind of generally people want to do something and want to feel valued and important. So that's a very simple, quick benefit. I want to feel as though I'm contributing. But there are other benefits. One study will give you first access to an app that might help you manage your condition, because what will help me? I want something to help me now. Well, actually, we don't have the answers, but we're developing the answers, and you can be part of that process of developing those answers. Or with the weight management program, one of the things that includes is weekly support sessions with a dietitian. Often people at the moment are kind of saying, I'm left on my own. I don't have any support. I don't have any contact. So through that study, there's inbuilt support. And there will be a period at the start of it where people will be on a diet supplement drink, which can actually be quite expensive. Because they're on a study, that diet supplement drink will be provided free.
Next, I talked to the wonderful Dr. Amy Small. She's lived through long COVID and is now trying to help others. Here she talks about what you can do if you have long COVID and don't know what to do, a struggle for many of us.
I think one of the things to do is to write down everything that's happening, write down all the symptoms you have, and then try and break it down into the things that are affecting you the most. If you put yourself in a GP's position, you've got 10 minutes to deal with someone who's come in and every aspect of their life is just a mess at the moment, from their mental health to their physical health to their financial situation, etc. And it can be quite overwhelming because it just all looks terrible and you've got 10 minutes and how on earth are you going to deal with that? So I think sometimes trying to hone down a little bit, and it might take several consultations. And I think sometimes it's about empowering patients to say, okay, can we discuss this thing today? And then I'd like to make another appointment to discuss this thing another day, and then trying to break it down into sections that feel more manageable. So if, let's say, your breathlessness is the thing that is keeping you back the most, that you can't function because you're so breathless, and that's making you worried and all the rest of it. But yes, you've also got aches and pains, your gut's not working so well, you've got some weird tingling sensations. Try to pick the thing that's bothering you the most, but keep a list of all the other bits to then bring and say, well, actually, these are also things that I'm concerned about that I'd like to also tackle at some point, but acknowledge that it can't all be done in one session. And I think, as I said, if there are things like breathlessness and fatigue, those are brilliant things to go to Chest, Heart, Stroke Scotland with. On the advice line, I've had brilliant feedback from patients I've referred to them because they have time. That, you can spend 45 minutes talking to someone who really understands what you're going through, who can advise you. And they will be very honest about what they can't manage, but they might help you be able to advocate, for yourself to then bring that forward to the GP. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think it's about breaking it down, keeping lists, and just keep going back. We don't know that you'll start struggling unless you keep telling us you're struggling. If you disappear into the ether, we think you're better.
And also what she would like to see in terms of care for people with long COVID.
I would like to see that everyone has access to multidisciplinary care. So I would like to see that GPs have somewhere to refer their patients to, that would then also be an educational hub. Whatever we learn from patients going to that can be fed back to GPs so that GPs can then understand and learn more. We write to each other, and that's often how we learn. I would very much like to see the benefit system acknowledge this illness, and I would very much like to see our government really put this on the forefront. It's part of our COVID recovery. We're talking about COVID recovery and how is Scotland going to recover from this pandemic? And this has to be part of it. When you look at the sheer numbers of people living with long COVID and how that affects our workforce, how that affects us who have caring roles, etc., it's not just about the medical aspect. It's got to be about the bigger picture and the whole picture, and making sure that people can contribute to society in a meaningful way and feel like they're doing that in a meaningful way. Because I think no one wants to be at home sick, not working. No one wants to be in that role. But sadly, that's very often what happens, and we need to help enable people to get better. And we need to help support them through that. So, yeah, I guess it's the whole picture, not just the medical one, making sure that we are nurtured and looked after.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. Next, I talked to Professor Nick Sculthorpe from the University of the West of Scotland about a couple of long COVID studies he is doing. Here he talks about the pacing study funded by the NIHR.
So one of the ways people try and avoid PEM is they track their own heart rate, and that's where the pacing idea comes from. And we came up with a way that we could kind of do that for people. You're trying to avoid doing too much, and if your heart rate is high for too many minutes in the day, then we'll send you alerts to say your heart rate's been high and high is different for you than it would be for me and it would be for someone else. So it's individualized. It's not just we've set a blank out rate. That's the other thing that's worth just mentioning, is that pacing is just a management technique. It's not an attempt to fix it or to cure it. It's just a way to try and manage the symptoms better. And if we can manage the symptoms better and maybe people have fewer crashes, then that creates a little bit of headroom where they can start to recover properly, maybe. At worst case, it helps you manage the things that you have to do better, even if it doesn't help you recover faster. And there's things people just have to do. You know, if your kids are at school, you have to go and pick them up.
This study is actually now looking for participants. So if you think that you might be interested, please do get in touch and I will point you in the right direction. In episode 7, I talked to the lovely Suzy Bolt. She has recovered from long COVID and has now set up her Rest, Repair, Recover programme to help others to recover too. Here she talks about the importance of the mind and the body. And then I asked her for her top 3 bits of advice, all of which are worth listening to.
And so I'm a big advocate of saying to people, if you need medical help to get your mental health in place, go get it. If you need to also balance that out with talking, go get that too. Let's prioritize the mind first, because the mind is in control of the body to a lesser or greater extent, however you want to believe it. I know it's quite a challenging thing for some people to kind of take on board. I'm just pushing it all the time as the message. Go get your mind in order, and then your body will be able to follow the right cue. You know, you're looking to get those kind of signals from the brain to say, it's okay, you don't need to panic now. I think I have got a top 3. My first one is educate yourself. So there's enough interviews, videos, shared experience out there now that you can watch and listen from your bed and go, okay, now that's interesting. If that's happening, I'm reassured, or I now need to go and ask for this specific piece of help from my GP and be referred to, you know, like educate yourself. What is this virus doing? What could be happening inside you? And let's get some tools in your kit around what to ask for help around. So I've got some great interviews that I did with Boone Lim, consultant cardiologist, Boone Lim, should I say, and his brilliant colleague, Dr. Melanie Danny, who's a consultant geriatrician. And they offered 3 hours of their time over 2 interviews, just explaining a lot of the things, not everything, but a lot of the things that are quite common that people are dealing with in this post-COVID malaise. So yeah, understand dysautonomia, MCAS, inflammation, histamine diets, the role of antihistamines, understand your gut, understand what you can do there. So education, that's my piece number 1. Number 2 would be really start practicing deep rest, like active, deep, conscious rest. Practice it. Do guided meditations. Do your breathing work. Slow things down. The Stasis breathing program is one of the most amazing programs that's out there for free. It's by Josh Dunst. I'm actually interviewing him in a couple of weeks, and Mount Sinai Hospital collaborated with him to kind of promote that. And it's free. And they talk about how to help retrain the body and the autonomic immune system into that kind of rest repair mode. And they've got a very specific set of protocols that they use with people with long COVID. And they are accessing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of patients around the world. And it's free. So find out about things like that. Get into the idea of practicing active rest 3 times a day. And active rest isn't holding a phone in your hand, looking at Facebook whilst you're in bed. That's not active rest, okay? Active rest isn't watching a movie on TV lying on the couch. That's not active rest. Really understanding, if I'm trying to calm everything down, I will need to do things differently. So get that, you know, really firmly under the bonnet of your beliefs. get into doing some body work, get into doing your yoga practice, even if it's just lying in your bed and kind of moving a tiny bit. Soothe your body and your mind like it was a 3-year-old having a panic attack. Soothe it. And then the next one, my number 3, is support. Don't do it on your own. Don't expect someone that doesn't understand or isn't going through it to get it. Find people that do, align, find your tribe, get a buddy, pair up. We've just set up something within my 360 membership now where we're buddying people, maybe someone who's got a bit more experience with someone who's newer, maybe there's similar sets of experiences and they can kind of support each other. So that's something that, is another layer. It's like, okay, you've got group support, you've got one-on-one support, you've got Facebook account support. The layers are important because not everyone in our lives gets it or is interested in it.
Next, I talked to Rachel Whitfield about her long COVID recovery. Her initial story is, I'm sure, very familiar to lots of us. Through a lot of her own research, she has learned a lot of things, both about the illness and her body's response to it, and she has actually now recovered.
And I think there's basically then 2 parts to getting out of it. One is to switch the fight or flight off, which is why things like meditation and being calm and reducing things that you have to do and reducing physical exercise and all those things to get you to a place of calm and less symptoms. So I think there's that part. But then, of course, you can't just live your life doing nothing. So the second part then is about how do you build back up? And I think it's almost like, if you're not careful, I think I almost have post-traumatic stress where those crashes were so traumatic that your brain then remembers them. And then you get the fear of, well, if I increase, is that going to happen? And in my view, actually, I worked out that the fear of overdoing it actually created certainly some of my later crashes. When I look back, there are things that definitely didn't add up. And the only explanation for me was that I was expecting PEM, so I started to get that. When I saw the breathing physio, so I saw someone on Zoom, and I genuinely didn't think that I had a breathing issue. I was a bit short of breath, but I was only doing it to rule stuff out, actually, because I was on a mission to get better. I'd made a decision, and so I was trying everything that anyone mentioned just in case. And when I met her online, she said, "Oh, you look fine." I had a bit of a suntan because I'd sat outside, and then she counted my breaths, and she said, "Are you a mouth breather? Are you a nose breather?" I said, "I think nose." And I saw myself sneak a breath through my mouth. I had no idea. And I think maybe that's it. People don't necessarily know. COVID is assumed to be just a respiratory disease. So when you didn't have the cough, tests don't reveal anything lung damage. I don't know. You don't put 2 and 2 together.
I then asked her what she would do differently with the advantage of hindsight.
Do you know what? I'd have listened more. So my mum warned me about post-viral fatigue, and to be honest, I poo-pooed it and went, don't, that's just typical mum. My partner told me to rest, and I poo-pooed him as well. My partner on a couple of occasions, and I think you've got to be really careful because he did say, I think it's worry. I think there's some anxiety. And I was like, don't be ridiculous. What are you saying? You're saying it's all in my head? There's interpretation, isn't there? And something's said in one way and you hear it in a different way. But I think if I take anything from this, it's actually the realization that an outside perspective can sometimes be the link to the blind spots that you might have. So I think I would listen to him if he's listening, listen to him more, Google less. Some of the Facebook groups have been a godsend because they tell you about some of these things, but also there's a downside that you can convince yourself. I mean, things that are even more sinister. Long COVID's hideous, but some even more sinister things. I think I would have thought about social media maybe and how I used that, because it can completely freak you out.
Next up, I talked to Claire Hastie, who founded Long COVID Support. She talks about what people with long COVID need and what she is fighting for. She also talks about why it is so important that research into long COVID involves the voice of lived experience.
I remember having a conversation with Barbara saying, right, we need a 3-word slogan. And I was like, right, research. And I was like, we were just trying to rack our brains. And we was like, let's think of 3 things beginning with R. So Barbara and I brainstormed and came up with rehab, research and recognition, which became our mantra and our battle cry, I suppose, for what we wanted. And rehab in its broadest sense, helping us get back to our former lives, be that through return to work or education, as well as actual treatment, be that pharmaceutical, non-pharmaceutical, physiotherapy, whatever. It was just get us back to our former lives invest in research to help us do that, and then actually recognise that we exist, because at the time nobody knew of our existence. The message was, and actually still largely is, you'll recover within 10 days or 2 weeks, or you might die. And the mantra was, again, very much that if you were young and healthy and fit, the view was that you'd be fine, and you might be on the sofa for a few days, but then you'd be fine. And so we had to really, really shout for our existence to be acknowledged. Something that I really want to be a legacy of this, actually, is that we collectively have been involved in so many research studies, or indeed notably not included in some. And I think we've seen the good, the bad and the ugly, and you'll have seen them the same as we have, I'm sure, when you get sent a survey to fill in and you just think, oh my God, your heart sinks. And you think, this has not been seen by anybody with lived experience of long COVID, because they're asking the wrong questions in the wrong way, of the wrong people at the wrong time, whatever it is. And you think, what an unethical waste of public funds and publicly funded expertise. I can't even describe the word, what it is. I just feel anguished, I feel appalled, I feel angry. We have got so little research funding in the scheme of things, and that needs to absolutely be directed to what is on the critical path to helping people get treatment. We don't need any more symptom tracking apps. We don't need anyone else to tell us what symptoms we have. We know this. The best research paper on symptoms was done by the Patient-Led Research Collaborative, and it is unequalled in terms of the scale and the number of people, but also the geographical diversity and the number of symptoms that were tracked and identified. So we know what we want people to look at, we know how we want people to look at it, and we want to make sure that there are learnings across other chronic illnesses in both directions, as in we want to learn chronic conditions. Yeah, I can't emphasise enough the importance of the nothing about us without us mantra, and including patients from the beginning as equals at the table.
In episode 10, I speak to Amanda Finley from the US. She set up a support group and is active in trying to help those struggling with long COVID. Here she talks about how important it is to stop transmission of the virus in the first place.
But people, they've got pandemic fatigue, which is, I don't know, as far as symptoms go, that is at the bottom of the list. I can't speak for any other country, but in the United States, we have people who've just said, oh, I'm vaccinated, I'm just going to do whatever now. And this is what gets me the most. If you get COVID, your chances are fairly good, of course. Your kids might get it, your grandmother might get it, your friends. But what happens is that transmission carries forward, and it will kill someone you have never heard of, you'll never meet. And I'm not okay with that. You can't control, you have so little control over whether you get it, because no one is watching out for you. The best you can do is to avoid spreading it. That's what gets me the most. We all know what we should be doing to reduce the spread. We all know. And I think that's really what's holding true right now. We all know the answer. You don't need to wait for the CDC or for WHO to release guidelines. We all know what to do. But we're just so done with this pandemic that we don't want to do it anymore. That's heartbreaking. I mean, if you could save just one person, it's worth it.
Next, I think about the other people who have been impacted by long COVID: partners, husbands, wives, family, and friends. Here I chat to Iain. His partner has a chronic illness, and he chats about how their relationship works around this and how they function as a team. We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much.
My advice to someone who's a partner of someone with long COVID would be, when you're doing the airplane safety thing, if oxygen fails in the cabin, the wee masks fall down, like put on your own mask first. And you go, well, what if my child's not got their mask on, or someone's struggling? Or they say put on your own mask first, because You're of no help to anyone. If you're worrying about everyone else's masks, then you collapse on the ground unconscious in the middle of the aisle. And I feel that while it might be counterintuitive, like looking after yourself is probably one of the best pieces of advice I can give. And finding out ways where you can both look after each other healthily. Like Cal early on was making sure that even in a bad spot, there were other friends we could call who Cal could go and hang out with. Or if I was feeling completely spent, I could go and take a day and clear my head or play some board games with my friends. One other thing I wanted to kind of say is that something that I think is really important for everyone is it's okay for it to be terrible now and then. Like, it's very important that, particularly if you've got something that you're dealing with for a long time, occasionally, when the mood takes you, it's important to be able to say, this is terrible, this is awful, insert profanity here, I don't like it. It doesn't need to be all making the best of a bad situation all the time. It's a really good valve to be able to let off, to have a rant about it and kind of complain and get that frustration out, because it is hard and it is terrible and it's not worth just holding that all in until it bursts. And this goes for everyone involved. This goes for the person who has the illness, the partners. It is difficult. And I would say one of the hardest things is not knowing at what speed or how it might get better. Often when you hit against a problem, like your mind can circle back to that place of, when is this going to get better? How is this going to get better? Everything is awful. And it's about allowing that frustration when it's helpful and healthy, but also either knowing as a person going through it yourself or as a partner, ways to spot that spiral early and kind of distract from that or go into another topic, because sometimes talking about it doesn't help.
In episode 12, I chat to Kelly Mitchell, the breathing PT. Breathing is such a big issue for many people with long COVID, and she chats about how breathing can affect so many parts of our bodies and that fixing a faulty breathing pattern can have huge benefits. This has been a massive game changer for me in my long COVID journey. Here she chats about the symptoms and also gives some general advice. Of course, you should get yourself properly assessed if possible.
The most common way is symptoms, really. So if we talk about long COVID, if you've been to your GP or you've seen a whole range of specialists and they've done all the tests on you and they're quite happy that there's nothing medically underlying, but you still have shortness of breath, chest pain, chest discomfort, pins and needles in your fingers, toes, around your mouth, dizziness, brain fog, fatigue, post-exertional malaise, those symptoms are potentially being driven by a faulty breathing pattern and the resulting physiology that happens. So it's more to do with the symptoms that you have. The easier group to pick out are those guys that talk about things like, I've got air hunger. So they talk about needing to take big, deep breaths and this inability to take a satisfying deep breath in, or shortness of breath on minimal exertion, despite being previously fit and well before. They can't catch their breath. They're the guys that are easier to pick up because they're the more common symptoms. But not everybody who has a breathing pattern issue has respiratory symptoms. You know, I've had loads of people say to me, if they reach out on social media, they'll say, my breathing is absolutely fine, I don't have any respiratory symptoms. And I'm like, oh, you might do, you know, you may well actually have an underlying issue. Number one is breathe through your nose. Your nose is really cool and it's designed for breathing. Your mouth isn't. It's a great backup. We need it at times, especially during higher level exercise. But your nose is actually what is designed to breathe. So your nose will heat the air, clean the air, wet the air. Really important. That's how your lungs like it. They don't like dry, cold, dirty air, which is kind of what happens when it goes through your mouth because it doesn't have the capabilities to do those functions. The other thing the nose does is it releases nitric oxide, which is a really cool gas, which opens up blood vessels and airways and gets everything nice and open. And if you bypass that, you don't have the benefit of the nitric oxide. So that's really, really important to make sure that you are nose breathing. The other thing nitric oxide does is it sterilizes the air. So really important, first line of defense against anything nasty in the air. So super important to breathe through your nose. How do you then re-establish nose breathing if your nose is completely okay? Is you just practice. So you would do that in a relaxed, calm way, whether that be lying down on your sofa, completely chilled, and you would just take one nose breath in and out. And if you can do one, do two. And if you can do two, do three. If after that you feel like, oh, I need more air, then just flip back to mouth breathing. You just slowly start to desensitize yourself to it and just keep trying to increase it slowly. The second thing is to think about your respiratory rate. So a normal respiratory rate, as we said, is around 8 to 12 breaths per minute. If you've got a problem with your breathing pattern, you may struggle to pull back rate. So people use different breathing programs and apps, and what they find is that they become very air hungry when they try to pull back their rate, but that's because their body wants them to breathe more, and they're saying, no, we're going to breathe less, and they get into a bit of a battle with it. If you're in that boat, you need somebody to guide you through it, more than likely, so that somebody needs to be rehabilitated from your breathing perspective. But yeah, getting your rate down, so breathing nice and slowly. And then the third thing really is to breathe into your tummy. We might have heard it: abdominal breathing, tummy breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. So breathing low into your tummy. So at rest, we should not be using our chest at all. We don't need it. Our accessory muscles, so muscles in our neck and our upper back and our chest, they'll elevate the rib cage rather than breathing low down into your tummy. So when you're at rest, you shouldn't have any movement from up here at all. So to assess yourself, get in front of a mirror, put one hand onto your chest and one hand onto your tummy, and just have a look and see what's moving. And if you have upper chest elevation rather than low down tummy movement, chances are, you're an apical breather, and that is a form of dysfunction. So yeah, you need to get it sorted.
And lastly, I chat to my friend AJ. She was diagnosed with post-concussion syndrome around 3 years ago, and has some amazing tips about how to navigate recovery of a long-term condition. She's an absolute inspiration. She chats about the feeling of guilt she has about the impact her illness has on her partner, and also how she tries to keep herself sparkling day to day.
It was bad enough that my life changed because of what happened to me in an instant, but the longer things went on with JP, I could see that he was doing so much to help me. It was very, very difficult accepting that I need help. But in a way, I felt really, really guilty because his life had to change so much to accommodate my health. And what I was saying earlier about not knowing your self-worth, I think it's hard to accept that you need help. It's hard to let others in and actually do the help for you. And I say this day, I don't know why JP's still with me. So many times I've tried to push him away. I've said to him, look, don't feel like you have to stay in this relationship out of any sense of loyalty. I don't want that. If you don't want to be in this, that's okay. And I'm prepared for you to walk away, because it's like I lost sense of my own self-worth. And I just thought, no, you didn't sign up for this. Yes, we've been together for years, but this wasn't part of the plan. But then over time, I think once you open yourself up to that help, and I think we've had a few very open conversations, and over time I've learned that, I'm still valuable as a human being, just like everybody is. We're all equal in that respect. Nobody's better than anybody else. And then I think once you realize that, yes, something life-changing has happened to you, but that's not all of your life, that's not all of you, that's one part of it, and somebody still loves you and you love them back, and it's okay to let somebody in, and just realize that this person is here for you. He wants to be here to support you. He's doing it because he loves you. It's not because he feels that he has to. And I think just comes with time. Earlier on in my brain injury recovery, one of my friends phoned and he asked me, what are you doing every day that makes you happy? And it was like a light bulb moment. I just thought, I don't know what makes me happy anymore, because there's so much about my old life that I don't have the ability to do anymore. And I don't know what it is that makes me happy. So I wrote a list and I put it on my fridge, and I've actually got it here. I can tell you some of the things that are on it. And for me, it's just about, it doesn't have to be big, grand moments. It's finding happiness in the little things that you can do every day. So initially when I had the brain injury recovery and I thought, I don't know what makes me happy anymore. I really don't know. And I had all these emotions that I just felt I very much was grieving for the old me and I didn't feel like myself. So it was almost an opportunity to draw a line in the sand. Okay, what can I do that makes me happy now? So when I talk about all the simple things, it really is. So one of the things at the top of my list is having Sunday cuppies with my family. This is something that we've done for years and years. I've got a massive family and it's very, very difficult for me now to be around a lot of people. It gives my brain challenges. It's difficult, but it's one thing that I keep doing when I feel able to, because it is being around my family and having that support is so important. Another thing for my list, rather than it being a weekly thing, something I can do every day is drinking hot chocolate in my favourite mug. And it's such a tiny little thing, but to me, I can sit on a chair that I like, get all nice and cozy with my nice cozy blanket. I can look out the window and see the nice greenery. And it's the simplest things. It is literally write yourself a list of things that make you happy.
Episode 14 is Long COVID Creativity. I'm not picking a snippet of this, as all of my contributors are equally awesome, and I just can't recommend enough that you listen to it in its entirety. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, please do listen to the full episodes, and I hope that this may have whetted your appetite for some of my guests. The Long COVID podcast will be back in January with more awesome guests. I hope that you are having a restful, peaceful, and COVID-free festive season. Thank you. Thank you so much to all of my guests, and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.